with all the crazy specs like Dolby Vision, 10-bit HDR, cinematic mode, I actually use it to make cinematic videos? Probably not. And we're not gonna get into what the hell cinematic means, because it's just, I made a video exclusively with the iPhone 13 Pro, but would I have even made that video had it not been for a review that I was making about it? Let's answer some of these questions. I mean, first of all, the fact that you're filming on a phone, it's almost like a second limb now, or not second limb, I guess we already have a few limbs. I found whenever I was setting up a shot, there's this thought of like, oh, that's it? Like, I just take my phone out? And so I almost felt like I needed to reach for a bigger camera, but I obviously didn't need to because I was shooting on an iPhone. And even when you're rigging it up a little bit, it's a much less involved process. This is all I used for the shoot. It was the phone, a handheld gimbal, and a clamp attached to a magnet. And this one is great because it wasn't a spring-loaded clamp, because I was putting it on the outside of a car and we're going over bumpy roads. So I just wanted to make sure this phone was secure, obviously. With the smartphone gimbal, it weighs like next to nothing. This one's from DJI, there's plenty of other ones. It self-balances too, so you just clamp it on with there's a little magnet connector and you're off and running super quickly. And because we're using the phone, I wanted to get some unique angles that would be tougher to get with a traditional, mirrorless or cinema camera. And so I thought I'd rig it outside of the car a couple times. And again, it took literally a few seconds. You just grab the magnet, attach it to the car, and then, position the camera accordingly. If you're doing that with a mirrorless camera, you obviously need a more robust mounting solution, and then you want to have reinforcements with cables or something. Again, with this, didn't need to worry about any of that. What was really great was this ability to think up a frame and then just be able to do it right away. There wasn't this other step of like, okay, well, how are we gonna do that? That difficulty gap between idea and execution is like almost non-existent. And I used one app with this, which is Filmic Pro, and the user interface, you gotta get used to it, but once you get used to it, it's really not a big deal. And the only reason I didn't use the native camera app is because you can't lock off exposure on its own. You can lock off exposure and autofocus together, but if you still want autofocus, but you wanna lock off exposure, you can't, and you can't set your white balance. Filmic Pro is great for the most part. I mean, you can control everything. You can control your exposure, your focus, your white balance, your bit rate. That being said, I do have one complaint about Filmic Pro. For the most part, I had no issues with it other than the fact that whenever you switch the orientation, if you locked in exposure manually or focus or anything, it resets everything if you change the orientation. This was especially a problem when you're using a gimbal and filming because you're like hanging out of a car with a gimbal and then you go into underslung mode, it flips the camera upside down. And then when you want to go hit record again, your exposure's out of whack. So you're gonna go back, manually override it, which can get frustrating once you've done it like 30 times in a day, right? So once I had the footage in DaVinci Resolve, which is my editing program, I decided not to work in an HDR timeline, but a regular Rec 709 one. It's like standard dynamic range. And what you'll notice right away is once you bring the footage off your phone, it looks completely overexposed and far different than it looked like on your phone. But once you start massaging that footage, you realize there's tons of latitude hiding in those highlights. So you can bring them all down. There's a ton of dynamic range in there. And because it's 10-bit footage, it can actually stand up to a good amount of grading, which was great. So I tried cinematic mode, just on a few shots, and here's the thing. If there's a lot of motion, it just doesn't look so good. And I did a little bit of digging, and so it is determining what to put in focus and what to blur based on the LiDAR sensors that's creating a depth map. But the thing is, the depth map is very, very low resolution, at least the one it's using for the purpose of cinematic mode. And as a result, you're getting a very crude cutout. So a crude cutout is okay if your subject is kind of still in a general rough shape, but if you've got too much detail, like leaves or fingers or something that's moving, it's just not gonna hold up. And I think that's gonna change in the future, but for now, I think it's more of a fun gimmick. It'd be fun for like Instagram stories or TikTok videos or whatever, but not for like making a cinematic short. Okay, so the experience was great, like filming on the phone. I loved having this tiny little thing that I could film on, but it's still obviously not as good as a mirrorless camera, so we're not talking about it replacing a mirrorless camera. So then what are we talking about? Like I genuinely was asking myself this question, like why are we even talking about the cameras of this phone in the context of making cinematic videos, right? I'm not talking about Instagram or TikTok, I'm talking about what they're advertising, like these more narrative style or documentary style videos that you could make on your phone. I mean, the reason I would ever shoot another piece entirely on the phone would be probably some deliberate attempt to, embrace limitations and focus more on composition and storytelling and not rely on things like shallow depth of field to make something look good, but, really think about your compositions. It's almost like intentional practice. Now, let's say you're less experienced with filmmaking. Could you go and buy this new iPhone and say start a YouTube channel and film exclusively on the phone and have it look great? 100%, but I feel like you could have done that with last year's phone and even the year prior. So I don't know, is that a conclusion? So what am I saying? I mean, and then on the photo side, it's easy. It's just amazing. It's like magic. Smart HDR and the 3 different focal lengths. It's really the best point and shoot you can get. Like it is, you don't need a point and shoot anymore. But for video, it's amazing innovations and cool features that you probably will not use to make cinematic videos for any reason other than to say, hey, look, I made a cinematic thing on an iPhone. You want to spray?
Yeah, maybe I'll.
Where's the shit? Oh, there. just make sure this. Just make sure this. I feel like this idea of embracing limitations to expand creativity. Did you check out the video I did on the Fuji X100V? I feel like that camera really embodies this philosophy well, plus it looks really nice. Have a good one.